Hello, Melissa here from Embodied Pilates, and I just want to take you through a quick pelvic tilt tutorial. So at the front of the pelvis, which is where I'm showing, we have these hip points, or the ASISs, that you can palpate on your own body in order to set up for a pelvic tilt. We also have a landmark that I'd like to point out, and that landmark is the tailbone at the back and the base of the pelvis. So those are the two landmarks we're going to be working with today. So let's find our ASISs on our own bodies by finding the middle of our hip crease and then walking our hands up and maybe out a little bit and finding those hip points or ASISs. And you can kind of tap, 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 and if you're too wide or high, you'll feel that it's not really bony. But then once you find those ASISs, you can kind of feel that you're tapping on something firm. We're going to take it down to the mat, lying on your back, knees bent, feet flat, hook lying position. So now the front of the pelvis, I've kind of turned it toward the camera, the hip points are now facing the ceiling. And then that tailbone is somewhat facing the wall at your feet, right? So we've got that tailbone and those hip points. So now we're going to go into our pelvic tilt. Find that hip crease, walk the fingers up, find those hip points or ASISs, and you're going to rock those hip points towards your ribs and rock them away from your ribs. We're going to do this several times. Rock hip points towards ribs, rock hip points away from ribs, hip points towards ribs, hip points away from ribs. Rock the hip points towards the ribs and pause. Feel how the low back is flat. Rock the hip points away from the ribs, pause. Feel how the low back is more definitively arched. So as the hip points come towards the ribs, low back flattens. Hip points away from ribs, low back arches. So you can feel that relationship changing between your low back and the mat. Hip points towards ribs, low back flattens. Hip points away from ribs, low back arches. Next time you roll those hip points towards the ribs, pause. Notice how the tailbone has actually started to move up towards the ceiling. And then go the other way, hip points away from ribs. And that tailbone starts to move down towards the floor. So when the low back is flattening, the tailbone is going more towards the front of the body. The hip points are going more towards the back of the body. And when you arch that back and the hip points go away from the ribs, hip points towards the front of the body, and tailbone a little more towards the back of the body. So you can allow the pelvis to move in its entirety, and hopefully feeling those bony landmarks allows you to move with a little more ease, a little more fluidity. And then you'll start to notice when you pass through the middle, right? So you've got this full range, hips towards ribs, And then this full range of hips away from ribs. And I wouldn't push into any end range, so you're not going to a place of pain or even a place of strain. You're just letting that pelvis rock forward and back. But really notice, when am I passing through the middle of my pelvic tilt? You're going to decrease your range so that it's only about 50% or a half range. So that deepening of your low back arch and the flattening of your low back arch gets smaller. And then you're going to decrease your range again, only about 25% of your range. So very modest range of motion in this 25% pelvic tilt. And then slowly come to stillness. Settle that pelvis, and that would be where you would have a neutral pelvis, where you would have the same range of motion, rocking those hip points away from the ribs as you do rocking the hip points towards the ribs. So you find that middle zone. Now you're set up in neutral, ready for your neutral pelvis, neutral spine Pilates exercises. I hope that video was helpful, and do as often as needed. Thank you.